Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I bring you founders, entrepreneurs, executives, thought leaders, artists, you name it, in the world of crypto and blockchain around the world. And today I have an amazing guest. Actually, I'm looking forward to this interview because I've seen a lot about this company and its platform in recent weeks online, and I'm excited about it. And my guest today, his name is Adam Simmons. He is the Chief Marketing Officer at RDX Works. Adam, welcome.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for having me on. Looking forward to it. And I'm very glad to hear you've been seeing a lot about us online. I will go and tell my team that they are doing a good job.
Awesome. So I'm looking forward to learning more today. So maybe I ask you first, what is your background, and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
So is it a logical background? I'll leave that up to the listeners to decide. I think it somewhat is, but as I think most people in crypto, very few people, if you go back a few years in an emerging industry, were like, hey, when I was a little boy, I wanted to grow up and work in cryptocurrency because it's so new. So I actually kind of ended up here from always working in startups. So originally, many moons ago, I was involved in the early days of esports and like online streaming. First as in front of camera, kind of influencer there, where I was relatively successful, then worked kind of behind camera organizing events. I then joined a pre-seed startup in the online video world, grew that in 4 years from just seed funding to 35 million monthly active users. During that, one of our seed investors had a big part in like crypto mining, and was always going to us like, hey, you should really look at this crypto stuff. Obviously, being in kind of like the video game space and online video space, we all knew about cryptocurrency, but we're like, we've got this rapidly growing, successful company. Don't see an exact fit here. So it wasn't until the kind of 2017 period that I co-founded another crypto project that I'm pleased to say is still running very successfully today. And then joined Radix, where I am currently, back about 4 years ago, and took that through kind of pre-launch all the way through to where we are now at about a $50 million TVL with our full stack all live.
Sounds good. So RDX Works, right? You just, I think you just accomplished the first year of your CEO's 3-year vision. So what is RDX Works all about? What is the vision, and where are you at in this next phase?
So RDX Works, we're one of the core developers behind the Radix network. So as with many kind of layer one networks in existence, there's kind of the foundation, and there's also a development company. And so we have a similar structure there. So Radix, the public network, has actually been being worked on since back in 2013. So our founder really got bitten by the Bitcoin bug back then, and completely saw the vision of decentralized money and rebuilding finance. But being a tech entrepreneur himself, started playing around and hacking around with it, and suddenly realized, hey, if we're going to onboard 8 billion people and $400 trillion of assets into the system, it's going to need to scale a bit more than it does. And that took him down about 7 years of work along with the team of really looking at how do you solve scalability in distributed ledger technology without compromising on any of the core principles of security, decentralization, and also one which is less talked about, which is atomic composability, which basically means the ability for any asset or application on the network to interact with any other instantaneously. We have what we believe the only design to be able to do that from a consensus standpoint. And in about 2018, we actually set the world record with a previous version of the consensus for the fastest throughput that's ever been recorded on a public network, with 1.4 million transactions per second. And we were then looking at, okay, how do we go to market with this? And one of the things, being a product-focused company, we did was good product research, and we went out and said, hey, what is the biggest barrier to making Web3, DeFi, crypto, whatever you want to call it, really go mainstream? And while scalability was important, what we found was actually it was the developer experience was a massive blocker. Anyone who kind of follows DeFi especially will know that in the last few years, billions of dollars have been lost through hacks and exploits. Predominantly because people are building some really cool things with tooling that is just not designed for that. And as a result, even the incredibly talented developers and the steep learning curve to be able to make production code in, say, like Solidity on Ethereum, you still see these hacks. And it's the equivalent of like moving into a really cool new neighborhood and having your wallet stolen once a week. Like, yeah, it's a nice place to live, but you probably don't want your wallet stolen every week. And as a result, we've got a lack of developers coming into the space because they want to be able to sleep at night. They don't want to lose their customers' funds. You've got a lack of businesses coming into the space because their cybersecurity teams and like SecOps teams come and have a look at the infrastructure and go, no way we're launching a product there. And so we then said, hey, we're going to have to relook at how like the virtual machines work in DLTs, how they're programmed, and we build Radix Engine and Scripto. And so Radix Engine is the execution environment on Radix, and Scripto is our programming language, which is based on Rust. And we can come on to those more later, but the easy way to think about them is it's the same sort of revolution that video game development had, where originally you had to build the physics engine, rendering engine, shadows, everything first before you start building your game. What Radix Engine does is it's like a game engine for DeFi and Web3. It's completely flexible. You can do anything with it, but some of the fundamental things like gravity or lighting and stuff like that are built in and editable rather than having to be built from scratch each time. And that makes it far more secure and far more intuitive to build with. Then the final bit of this is that we got that out. We got great feedback from developers over the last couple of years for this, building very powerful things very, very intuitively. And then again, as a product company, went back to the start. What is the challenge now that's stopping this being mainstream? And the big answer was the user experience. Ultimately, today, if you look at something like MetaMask, or even things on Solana, etc., it is not an experience that our friends, our families, and our colleagues can confidently use. Blind signing, seed phrases, wallet drain attacks, all of these sort of things are great if you're a crypto native and terrible if you're a normal person. Most people don't want to have that responsibility and that risk, which means if they can't be confident interacting with these networks, they're not going to. And because of the work we've done of kind of building this full stack of technology from the consensus to the execution and now the UX layer, we were able to do things that are just impossible to build on other networks, which takes us to where we are now with all of those things live and 6 months in from smart contracts being live on the platform. And we've got a thriving ecosystem that's growing every single day.
I have two follow-ups on what you just said. The first one is a positive thing. Secondly, it could be positive too, but the first one, I never heard of this. I've heard of atomic swaps. I've never heard of atomic composability. What's that? What's the difference?
So atomic composability, one of the things when you look at consensus design of blockchains or distributed ledger technology in general, is that any one chain, so to speak, is always going to have a bottleneck on how much throughput it can have. Just in the same way as if you imagine it as like a water pipe or something like that, no matter how big you make it, there's only so much water that can go through a pipe at the end of the day. So what is one solution to that is things like L2s or sharding and things like that, where you parallelize those so you've got multiple different pipes that information can travel down. Now, conceptually, that works quite well because you're like, okay, well, things that are unrelated can be parallelized and processed on different areas, so you don't have to do it all at once. The problem with that is that one of the superpowers of like a global distributed ledger technology for assets and like crypto is that anything could interact with anything else. So if you shard that information and you might go, well, we're going to put all DeFi on one shard and all NFTs on another shard because NFTs are one thing and DeFi is another thing. Well, the problem with that is then what happens if I want to use my NFT as collateral for a loan to do a swap, to do arbitrage on the DeFi shard? Those two shards have to communicate. Now, there's a bunch of really, really smart solutions in the market to have that work, but they have a delay in them. And that delay could be tiny, but there is some kind of delay where shard 1 has to say lock up the funds until it's executed on shard 2, or it executes it, but if it doesn't work right, it rolls it back. But on something like a DEX, if they're a decentralized exchange, how do you roll back something if it's already been done and other people had also traded in that same block or whatever? So what atomic composability means is the ability for anything on any of the different shards to interact in a single transaction and either be successful or unsuccessful in one moment. And the reason this may sound unnecessary to some people is going, well, why does it matter if there's a second or two delay? If you think of something like financial markets, a second or two delay on an arbitrage opportunity introduces risk. Whereas if you one of the things that most consumers won't even think about, but like flash loans are a massive innovation of DeFi, where you borrow some money to do a trade to make a profit and pay back the loan all at the same time effectively. That is basically a zero risk opportunity to do an arbitrage. As soon as you add any delay in that, risk is involved, which means people are less likely to do it because they've got to hedge their risk of doing that swap, and therefore the market becomes less efficient. And it may be orders of magnitude better than what we have today, but it's not as good as what DeFi and Web3 could be if you do have atomic composability. So something like Ethereum on a single shard already has atomic composability. It's not something people realize is a problem because we have it there. But what's coming with things like sharding everywhere other than Radix breaks that fundamental. And Radix has a unique solution called braiding, where basically if things aren't required to work together, they're separate shards. But if information on different shards need to come together in the same transaction, they're braided together. So you can conceptually, you can think of it in a simple way of, I say simple, anyone who's seen, I've forgotten what the film is, but where they explain a wormhole with a pencil through a piece of paper. Basically the same thing. If you've got the two bits of paper, they're separate. If I'm sending money to my mum and you're sending money to your wife, those two transactions can happen independently. Neither of them are dependent. And they could be on different shards, but if I need to send money to you, those two bits of paper could fold together and become one bit of paper and a single shard just for that transaction, and then fold apart again. Now, the way you then scale that is by having essentially an infinite number of shards. So Cerberus, our consensus mechanism in its end state, has 2 to the power of 256 shards, which for anyone who isn't good with orders of magnitude is more than there are atoms on Earth. It's actually close to the number of atoms in the universe. So what you do then is each shard isn't thinking about, oh, I'll put a DEX on a shard, or I'll even put a wallet on a shard. Every single fraction of every single token of everything could be on its own shard and be processed independently. And it then folds together or braids together when there's two related transactions. Then your problem is just getting enough nodes to power all of those different things in process. And basically, as you get more nodes, they cover less and less of those parallel tracks and only braid together when they need to. And so things can be parallelized but behave as a single shard when they need to be atomic. And that was a very quick super speed view of what atomic composability is and why it matters and how Radix solves it.
I love the concept of braiding. It's a unique invention in the space, very cool. So that was that. Yeah, I like that answer. The other thing you said earlier, back in 2017, I remember seeing a commercial, right? It was by Accenture, and they said they came out with an editable blockchain. And you just said a little bit earlier, you have an editable blockchain. That's concerning. Maybe what is that? Why editable, and what's that all about? And get to that.
Yeah. So just to be clear, so when I'm talking about editable, I'm talking about the concept of the Radix engine, which is the virtual machine, as a game engine. So Radix at its core consensus layer, it's not actually a blockchain. It's its own unique type of DLT, but splitting hairs, you can think of it the same as any other blockchain. That is a immutable, permissionless, open public ledger. So what is there cannot be changed. That is the entire purpose of a consensus layer, to have this single ledger that everyone can agree is true and is authorized or is authenticated by decentralized nodes. That's got to be there. How you make that programmable is with a virtual machine. Now, Radix engine, one of the things we realized, if you look at something like Ethereum, so Ethereum has the Ethereum virtual machine, which is programmed with Solidity. Now, that is a Turing complete language. So for computer science terms, Turing complete means you can basically do anything with it. You can program it to do whatever you want. The problem with that is that it can do anything you want. Now, when you're thinking about especially assets, and by assets, I mean not only tokens and NFTs, but also things like identity and stuff like that, you actually don't necessarily want them to be able to do anything. You want them to do predictable things. And so what Radix engine does is it has our core concept is this idea of native assets or asset-oriented programming. So Radix engine and Scripto are Turing complete, but the way assets are handled, be that tokens, NFTs, identity, badges, and some other things, are hard. You can kind of think of it as like hard coded into the engine. of going, these can only do behaviors that the engine and network enforce, rather than the programmer having to make each individual application agree on how that's done. And the end result of that is that assets on Radix conceptually behave just the same as like physical money. So and like the physics of how that works is enforced by the engine rather than by the application. So if you think of this in the Ethereum way, you don't actually own any assets on Ethereum. There is a smart contract for, say, like USDC, and that is a ledger that says how much different accounts own of it. And if I want to send you some money, I don't actually send you USDC. I send a message to the ERC USDC smart contract and say, minus 10 USDC from me, add 10 to your USDC balance. And then your wallet sends a message there and goes, hey, how much USDC do I have? And it says you have this much. On Radix, it actually behaves more like me handing you a $10 bill. Now, if I've got the $10 bill, I'm in possession of it. If I try and give it to you and you don't take it, I'm still in possession of it. If I let go of it in the middle of the air, it doesn't just float there. It goes, this is an error state. Someone has to own this $10 bill. It's either mine or yours. Those are the only two states. As soon as you take it, you now have it, I don't have it. And essentially everyone else on the network, or the validators on the network looking, can go, well, who owns that $10 bill? Now, the reason this matters, other than making it far more intuitive to code, is things like common exploits like reentrancy attacks can't occur. So a reentrancy attack, for those who don't know, is basically when I send that message to update the balance of USDC in the smart contract, and you go and check it, there can be an ordering problem where maybe the follow-on from that is you check if the money's there before you send me an NFT. If that check is done before it's actually confirmed, and I manage to roll back updating that balance in USDC, but after you've already sent me the NFT, I could get the NFT for free and have scammed you out the money. On Radix, that's impossible, because either I've got the $10 note or you've got the $10 note. And if you've got it and you give me the NFT, I've got the NFT, not you. There's no way that that can be ordered or have a confusion going through there. The other big benefit of this is that this asset-oriented approach essentially means that developers don't have to keep redefining what things like assets are. So things like the ERC20 standard are just basically people going, we all need to agree what an asset is coded like, so that all our different applications understand what an asset is. Now, this causes really interesting problems. So anyone on, say, Ethereum have heard of people who have sent, say, a token to a smart contract by mistake. And they go, how do I get it back? And you're like, tough luck, you can't. It's gone forever. And the way I like to envision it, because I'm not a developer myself, I'm just a simple degen at the end of the day. The way I imagine it is it's kind of like a vending machine. So on Ethereum, it's just an open slot. And if I come to America from the UK and I put £1 in a vending machine that's just an open slot, it goes, I don't know what that is, and I try and get some stuff out, and I get nothing out because it doesn't know what my pound coin was, rather than a quarter. It can't give it back to me because it has no idea what a pound coin is. It's just gone into the void forever. On Radix, that vending machine has, when you create it, you have to specify what can go in that slot. So rather than in Ethereum, you say you can only put a dime in. You cannot, and you'd have to specify, you cannot put a pound in or a euro in or a yen in, and have to specify all those things that you can't put in. But then someone comes along and tries to put a hamster in. Unless the developer said, you can't put a hamster in here, it goes, well, a hamster came in. I don't know what a hamster is, but it's here now. And you go, can you send the hamster back? And the code goes, well, I don't know how to send a hamster back, so no. On Radix, it's like, you can put $1 in. And if you try and put anything else in the hole, it just doesn't fit. So the transaction is invalid, and that's invalid at the network level, not at the application. So all these sort of things are no longer jobs for the developer to go and think of all of these edge cases. The developer can say what is allowed, and anything that isn't one of those things is a failed transaction at the network layer, rather than the application having to say that can't happen. And so this makes things a lot more intuitive all the way through. And it's very similar to like game engines. So the reason I use that analogy is back before game engines like Unreal or Unity existed, you'd have to start by going, I need to program gravity. I need to program what's solid, or like how bullets drop over distances and stuff like that. And you could do it. It was just really hard maths. And step one was basically, in game development, hire a physicist to help you do all that really hard math. As a result, 80% of the time of building a game was building these low-level fundamental things to make the game behave, even though 99% of games were like, gravity's going to behave like gravity does on Earth. My person runs around and jumps around there. And they were redoing it every time. And that's why you got weird bugs like people falling through the world or clipping through walls or whatever, because there was a weird edge case for it. Now, in a game, that's annoying. In DeFi, if I put, say, $1 million on a table and someone coded the table wrong and it falls through the world, gone forever, I'm a bit more unhappy than if it was in a video game. In Radix, what game engines did basically was saying, well, hang on, everyone wants gravity. So we'll create an engine that understands what gravity is. And everyone can then use that and spend more time building their game. Now, the difference between this thing and where some people get it wrong is they go, oh, so it's like a drag and drop website builder. And it's not, because that is very constraining. A game engine says, you've got this thing called gravity. Most people we know are building a game, and gravity probably in their head as they're imagining it behaves like on Earth. But if someone comes along and goes, actually, my game's in space, I don't want any gravity, they just go into the game engine and set gravity to 0. All the other parts of the game engine still exist, and the engine hasn't stopped them doing something. It's just given them the tools so they don't have to keep building those things from scratch, so they can spend more of their time building the features and functionality their users want, rather than the things they need for it to be able to function. And that's what I mean by editable, of what the engine does is specifically built around asset behavior, authorization, and identity management.
Great. Awesome. Thank you for explaining. Yeah, a really interesting concept you guys have built. And I want to talk about, you mentioned smart contracts, you mentioned developers. Several developers, I think maybe even you, in the Web3 community believe that smart contracts are not smart enough for the mainstream, right? So why is making DeFi more user-friendly crucial for the widespread adoption of Web3 globally?
So for me, it all comes down to confidence, basically. So Web3, if we get really abstract for a moment, the internet is essentially a data layer for the world. You can send any data anywhere in a permissionless way to anyone at any time. For me, blockchain, crypto, Web3, whatever you want to call it, its end goal is basically being an asset layer. It's to transfer assets of value anywhere in the world with anyone autonomously. Now, obviously, if you think of how much security and thought goes into the internet and sending data around, assets are worth even more. They have a value to people. So this needs to be created in a way where it is very intuitive for people. They feel very confident doing it. And you've only got to look in like TradFi, how resistant many people were to like mobile banking originally, because they didn't feel confident in it. Now, Web3 today doesn't make you confident in what you're doing. So smart contracts, like I've just described, you hear problems of like, oh, I accidentally sent my USDC to the USD smart contract rather than to the person I was meaning to send it to. What do I do? And the response today is, tough luck, you've lost your money. Now, that isn't a good solution. Another problem is things like blind signing. When you go and sign a transaction in MetaMask, you just see a transaction hash. Yes, people go, well, you could go and look on the smart contract code and work out exactly what it's going to do and stuff like that. But realistically, is that something your friends, your family, your grandmother or whoever is really ever going to do? No. Simultaneously, every couple of days you hear about people having their wallets drained because they signed a transaction that was malicious. Until we solve things like that, people aren't going to confidently use Web3. It'd be like imagine every time you send some money with your bank, it's like, well, you've got this new system where sending money with your to someone else via your bank is now 10 times cheaper, but every time you hit the button, there's a 1% chance you lose all the money in your account. Not very many people are going to do that. What's more is it's not there's a chance you'll do it. It's like you have no idea. There'll be a random strings of letters and numbers, and that might be the one that drains all your money, but you've got to say okay anyway. Now with Radix, because of the Radix engine and this asset-oriented approach, we can actually create a user interface layer that is far more intuitive. So because of the way assets move and the network understands what assets are, we have something called the transaction manifest. So whenever you construct a transaction on Radix, even the raw transaction manifest is basically human readable, and it describes what asset movements are going to be. So say I was swapping $10 for £10 with you. Conceptually, that should be quite simple. What would you expect? I give you 10 pounds, you give me $10. And unless you get my £10, I don't get your $10. In MetaMask and basically every network, because there isn't this concept of assets, it's basically just saying all these smart contracts are called. I don't understand what they are. And this hashes to this code is going to be executed. Are you okay with that, Adam? I basically have to say yes and hope that whatever front end I've interacted with is doing the good thing and it's not a phishing attack or something like that. On Radix with a transaction manifest, you can very easily parse that and actually say, well, what this transaction is doing, because I understand what assets are, is £10 are going to be removed from Adam's account and are going to be deposited to your account, and $10 are going to be withdrawn from your account and deposited to Adam's account. I can also, in that transaction manifest, set a guarantee. So I can say at the network layer, if I don't get at least $9.99 back from you, I'm not doing this swap. If you try and shortchange me, the network goes, hang on, it's not at least, he's only giving you $9 back. Not happening, not going to happen. And all of this is presented in a very clear, human readable way in the wallet, as if it was doing a simple transaction with actual physical money or coins or tokens. And that is only possible because of these different layers of the stack. So to answer your question, when people say smart contracts aren't smart enough, they are smart enough in the sense that they can do anything, but they do not surface the right information to the user interface layer or to the developers to enable them to intuitively and confidently use and build these tools, which means there's a lot of room for things to go wrong and go wrong unexpectedly. And as with any kind of movement of things of value, you don't want unexpected things to happen. You want to know clearly what's going to happen and be confident that what you say is going to happen does get done. And that's what Radix exactly does with things like the transaction manifest and guarantees at the network level. So to put in an exact example of like a wallet drain attack, say someone built a malicious fake DEX on Radix, where it says you're going to swap one BTC for $70,000, and you click transaction. If it was malicious and is instead going to drain all the money from my account, on my Radix wallet, I would see nasty swap, DEX or whatever it's called, is going to withdraw from your account all of your assets, and it would list them all out. All of these are going to get taken out and nothing's going to come back. Are you okay with that? And of course, anyone, if you see it that way, is going to go, no, I'm not okay with that. Don't sign that transaction. This is malicious. That's not what's expected to happen. On MetaMask and basically every other network, what you'd see when you went to sign that transaction, you think it's going to do that swap, and it just says transaction hash 0xAB741355 whatever, sign, question mark, and you have to go, yeah. And people sign it because they think it's something that they want. It's a site they think they've used before, but if it's been hacked or if it's a malicious phishing site, they have no idea. Whereas on Radix, you would clearly see it's going to withdraw all of these things from my account, or it's going to do the swap, and the network will make sure that whatever is seen in that transaction manifest is the only thing that can happen.
I need to switch to Radix. So that's a good, I like that, because so it's not the smart contracts that aren't smart, it's the mainstream that's not smart enough because they're not intuitive without being directed by subtle prompts. Like, I don't call it the warning, you're going to lose all your money, a subtle prompt, but it's a prompt that educates people. So I think that's a good idea. I think it's
what basically the key principle of our UX on Radix is what you see is what you get. And you don't even need to trust the application or the UI or anything like that on the DApp, because the network itself is able to tell you what is going to happen and enforce that what you sign is the thing that actually happens.
Got it. Interesting. I like it. I like it. So where we're at, I'm looking at where we're at in the DeFi stage, and we're kind of still early,
Unbelievably early.
unbelievably early. And the first DeFi summer was 3 summers ago, 2021, I think. And we haven't had one since, right? That was when
Yep.
obviously Link went up, and those companies still building, right? So when is the next DeFi wave coming? Will it ever come? And what are some of the trends we need to watch out for in the market that'll lead us up to the DeFi trend to kind of signal us, hey, DeFi summer's coming again?
So, first and foremost, I cannot stress how early we are, even in DeFi summer. So, at the peak of DeFi summer, we were still less than 0.1% of the entire global financial system. There's about, not including derivatives, which is just a crazy number, but hard assets, there's about $400 trillion in the TradFi system. DeFi summer didn't even come to a rounding error of that. So we are on a standard like adoption curve of innovators, early adopters, early majority and stuff. We're barely into the innovator stage in the grand scheme of things. However, it was getting that hockey stick growth during DeFi summer. And the only reason, in my opinion, that we didn't see it get a lot bigger at that stage was because of scalability problems on Ethereum. It's basically people going, hey, these dexes are great. I can swap tokens easy. It's way easier than an exchange. I understand how this works. It's really quick and easy. But suddenly it was costing $100, $200, $300 to do a simple swap. Didn't make sense. So it stuck the brakes on it. The next piece was the user interface layer, obviously. But for a bunch of reasons, we hear crypto winter. And so general interest in crypto died down. The concept was kind of proven there, but it also created a whole bunch of new problems. So the next wave of DeFi, I firmly believe DeFi is inevitable, not from any ideological reason. I mean, ideologically, I like the idea of DeFi. I think it's going to be good for society as a whole. But from a purely pragmatic standpoint, it makes a more efficient market. And ultimately, the global financial system has one job: to efficiently allocate liquidity based on a balance of opportunity and risk. And a single global asset layer of DeFi does that unbelievably more efficiently than the current TradFi system. So there is economic incentive and efficiency incentive for DeFi to just be better, just in the same way that an open internet is the standard now, rather than a whole bunch of different siloed intrawebs at different companies, because having that one network that everyone could agree was truth and could interact, as long as you had the right permissions and security and stuff around it, was a better solution. So what's it going to take to make the next kind of DeFi summer? Well, I don't actually think it's one thing. I think it's multiple things. So first and foremost, crypto needs to get sexy again. We're already seeing that. Like, let's face it, as the overall crypto market cap goes up, people start seeing it, they start getting involved, they start playing. We saw that in the 2017 era with ICOs and people going, hang on, this is a really cool way to get involved in things that were inaccessible to the average Joe beforehand. In 2021, we saw it with DeFi summer and going, hey, there's a really much better way to interact with financial products than before. We saw it a bit with the NFT trend. And these kind of things come along and prove a concept at a very early level and then hit some kind of stumbling block to make it bigger. So the first piece is just getting that attention back to a new kind of crypto bull market. We'll see all the press. People will come flooding in looking for the cool stuff being built. And the great thing about crypto is that during the bear market is the saying, bear markets are for builders. That's when people actually go and build cool stuff. I like to think like Radix. We've spent the last couple of bear markets building some really cool stuff. When you get that attention, people come and play with it and go, okay, what can I build here? What can I build? What can I use? What can I get involved with? So that's one. Once you get that, I think we've got a really good groundswell of what I call these kind of next generation layer ones, like Radix, like Sui, like Aptos, that have really built on a lot of the core principles that Ethereum and even things like Solana, Near, and stuff have innovated in the last cycle and have solved many of these developer and user experiences that actually mean that they aren't going to put the brakes on it. And that is probably the most important thing, is that innovation doesn't have a brake put on it. And the crude analogy I use for this is kind of like building an aeroplane. If you think of Ethereum, it's like the Wright brothers Kitty Hawk. It was the first thing to fly. Absolutely incredible achievement. Revolutionized the entire way the world thought about transport, that now humans can fly. That's what Ethereum was for the like smart contracts and DLT space. Equally, if you came to visit me in London and the plane that you were boarding looked like the Kitty Hawk, I don't think you'd get on board it. The modern jet still flies, but it's been innovated in 1,000 different ways to make it viable for mass passenger transport. And that's basically the innovation that we've seen, is that whereas you could say like Ethereum was the Kitty Hawk, things like Solana were the invention of like the turboprop and like better airframes. It was okay, it was way better, it was faster, but still wasn't suitable. It's only with these new layers, ones like Radix, like Sui, like Aptos, where all of these different things, the jet engine, the cabin safety, the oxygen systems, the entertainment system, all of those things have come together and reached the point where it's at least as good as what came before in TradFi and is radically better in a bunch of other ways. So that's the second piece. You need to have these cool things. The third piece for DeFi Summer is always from the builders who are building on these networks. And so the really big thing here is, and why I say DevX is so important for the user, is if you think of smartphones, smartphones were great, but many people forget that the original iPhone didn't have an app store. Now, when the App Store came out, that revolutionized smartphones because suddenly there was so much competition for building cool apps that are useful. And there's kind of two categories of application if you think on a smartphone. There's the few apps that if you sampled 100 people randomly on a city street, probably 95 out of the 100 of them will have the same group of apps. They'll have like a banking app, or they'll have Instagram or whatever. And they're kind of mass market ones. They found really good product market fit and everyone needs them. But there'll also be apps on each of those 100 people that none of the other people have. They're very specific apps for their very specific thing. And that is only made possible because of the fact building an app on a smartphone, thanks to the app stores, became something that loads of people could build. So then you start getting competition, innovation, and you build on that spark of other ideas to create either great mass market products or great specialist products. And that is what I think we're going to see in the next era of DeFi Summer, where things like Uniswap, for example, in the last DeFi Summer, innovated automated market makers. It was so complex to build that innovations on top of that were really slow and development was really slow. Whereas the ability to build, say on Radix, thanks to Radix Engine and Scripto, one of our dexes, for example, OsciSwap, bear in mind, smart contracts only went live 6 months ago. They have already implemented Uniswap v4 on Radix. And that is before Uniswap has implemented it on Ethereum. And this is a small team, not one of the biggest projects in DeFi. And they've been able to do that because the tooling for developers on Radix is so much better. So that means there's more innovation, more creativity, more specialist products that as an end user, you're going to find something you want to use. And the user experience is going to be good enough that you feel confident using it and recommending it to other people, which creates that growth to get us out of innovators into like the early adopters and also into the early majority. So that's the third thing, having great competition of dApps. The fourth and final thing, which may not necessarily be required for the next wave of DeFi Summer, but definitely for kind of mass adoption, is ultimately nothing to do with technology. It's all to do with regulation and how governments interact with this technology. And very topical, like obviously Uniswap has a lawsuit from the SEC at the moment. And there's kind of two ways of thinking of this. So Radix as a whole is of the opinion that it is not our job to decide what regulation should be and what should be possible. Our job is to have a network that is able to facilitate whatever functionality society deems as necessary. The only red line is that the core network, the base layer, is always completely permissionless, decentralized, and open. Just in the same way as the core internet is completely permissionless. Now, the internet on the whole transmits data, but the internet protocols don't care what that data is. To them, data is data. It's designed to move that around and it moves any data that it's told to. Now, some of that data could be terrorist activity. Now, you don't try and stop that at the protocol level, you stop that at the application layer. And that's where we think this is all about authentication. And so like one of the things the Radix engine has is a concept of badges. So we actually built in, as well as tokens and NFTs, authorization and permissions as a core function. And we call them badges. Now, badges conceptually are super simple. If you've ever worked in an office, you probably got given a badge to get in the front door. You swipe it, the door opens for you. If you don't have a badge, you don't get in. Now, your badge might let you in the front door, but not into the server room. One of the tech team may have a badge that lets them in the server room as well. Now, that badge is in your possession, but you don't own it. The company owns it. And they can issue it to you. They can call it back. They can change what permissions you're able to do with those badges. And that is exactly how badges work on Radix. They're in your account and you can show them as part of a transaction to show that you have authorization, but they can be recalled from you or can be edited based on the permissions that the issuer wants you to have. Now, this creates a technical solution to lots of the things around what regulators may wish to do in terms of interacting with DeFi and different apps and the things you need, all the way through to social things. Like actually, maybe you need a badge to prove you're over 18 to access adult content. Again, this can be done without you having to give your ID document to the adult site. Instead, you get a badge issued by some trusted entity that goes, yep, I've verified this person's 18. You flash that badge in the transaction and you're able to access it. Again, hypothetical, but this is about creating the technical solutions are there with things like Radix and other kind of next gen layer ones. It is now about regulators and governments really looking at how do we meet the needs of what society wants us to bring in terms of safety nets and regulation with the technology we have available, rather than what they seem to currently be doing in most places, which is trying to apply the regulations and frameworks from TradFi and just force it onto DeFi and Web3. And not only does it not work, it's taking a blunt approach to something that you could have a scalpel. So one of my favorite analogies for this is something like in the US, the accredited investor laws. So in the US, there is, for certain investment opportunities or financial opportunities, you have to be an accredited investor and have, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's like $1 million net worth or $250,000 a year income that has to be certified, and then you can be an accredited investor. Now, on the one hand, that is incredibly unfair, because why is someone with $999,999 too dumb to be able to interact with a complex financial product, but if they earn $1 more, they're suddenly smart enough to? Kind of stupid. However, there had to be that arbitrary system put in place because in the TradFi world, there was no way to make that more granular or achieve the result of trying to protect people from high risk financial products and not basically wreck their financial futures inadvertently. But equally, the person with $1 million could still wreck their financial life. It doesn't protect them either if they don't know what they're doing. And someone with $100,000 who's actually a financial genius and understands this can't access it, which means there's less liquidity in market. With DeFi, because of this global asset layer, you can actually have some really cool solutions there. So you could say, actually, this product, you're only able to put in 2% of your net worth into high risk products. Doesn't matter if you've got $10 or $10 million. That's the rule. And again, this is not necessarily a good solution. I'm just saying you can do that programmatically and the network can enforce that, or the applications can enforce that based on things like badges or stuff like that on Radix. And regulators now have these tools to meet these goals in different ways, in things like KYC and AML. We already have this in TradFi. If I send you money from my bank to your bank, my bank doesn't need to get a copy of your passport and proof of address and all your details to know that I'm not sending money to a terrorist. Assuming you've got a good bank, they can go, hey, my bank knows your bank, they've audited them, they know your bank's regulated and they've done a check on you, and so therefore they're happy sending money to you. Now, what they're trying to bring in DeFi at the moment is like everyone has to check everyone's details. Well, that is hugely unscalable. It stifles any innovation because small startups can't afford the compliance costs and everything else like that. And actually, it's not what happens in TradFi today. But if you think of something, again, like badges on Radix, if you had an entity, say like Coinbase or the IRS or something, could issue a badge saying, I've checked out Adam Simmons. I verify that he is a legitimate person. He's allowed to do DeFi things. That badge doesn't have any personal information about me on chain, so I'm still private. But a DeFi product could go, as long as you've got one of these badges that's valid, that the IRS or HMRC in the UK has verified you as being a safe person to transact with, you're allowed to use my application. They then don't need this massive team, and the technology enables a much more granular and surgical approach to meeting these demands of not funding terrorism or whatever, without taking a blanket rule that stifles innovation and startup and competition and ultimately a more efficient market. And so that's kind of the final bit that I think the crypto industry has to lobby for, but ultimately can't solve because it's not a technology problem, it's a societal problem. And I think that my personal opinion on this is that the we won't have a world, and I'm not actually sure we should have a world, where there's no regulation in DeFi, because ultimately consumer protections, if you take them at face value, are there to protect people. Now, just because they're there to protect people doesn't mean they need to be implemented in a certain way, but actually you can look at how can we really implement them in a way where it serves their purpose without restricting personal liberties, personal choices, while also protecting society. And if you take that to kind of the base level, I'm pretty sure that if you ask most people, say in the US or in London or something like that, hey, do you think there should be safeguards in place so people can't send money to terrorists? They're probably going to go, yeah, that sounds like something the government should probably make sure doesn't happen. If you say, hey, do you think there should be something that means that if I want to withdraw $100 from my bank account, that I get 20 questions about what I'm doing with it, who I'm paying, and everything else, they're probably going to go, no, I don't think that's what I should do. And so the technology of Web3 and DeFi really means that a lot of these things can be implemented in a far more granular way that maybe serves the needs of what society wants, without creating over restrictions or stifling what we can do with our money, and create a better way forward there, not only from a efficiency of market standpoint, but also from a individual freedom and control standpoint.
I love that answer. I am going to disagree with something you said earlier. You said, I'll quote you, I'm just a simple degen. I think you're more than degen, and I appreciate the time, and I enjoyed speaking with you, and I learned a lot today. So I want to thank you very much for coming on. And I have one last question. Really, it's a simple one. How can people find out more information about you, about RDX Works, about Radix protocol? How can they do that? How can they use it? How can they become clients? Any of that.
So starting with Radix. So if you literally just go to radixdlt.com or just search for like Radix crypto on Google, it will come up. Getting started is super easy because Radix is an open permissionless network. So I encourage everyone to go and download our mobile wallet, try out a couple of dApps. There's some amazing stuff in the ecosystem already, and just have a play and see what's available there. Join our community on like Telegram, Twitter, etc. All the usuals. If you want to hear some more from me, you can find my Twitter account is usually where I'm most active. And that is just Adam_XRD.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me. And thank you for everyone who tuned in. It's been a pleasure.